One is the guy who does deals, who gets out of wars and doesn't entangle America in foreign engagements. And the other one is the strongman.
In the Times this morning, the historian and regular breakfast guest Niall Ferguson and the former Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant argued that swift, effective American strikes on Iran would be the coup de grace in assistance of Israel in its war. And the Times leader column argues that if President Trump requests our help, we should honour that. Meanwhile, the government continues to seek diplomatic solutions. The Foreign Secretary David Lammy will hold talks with European leaders and Iranian officials in Geneva today as part of efforts to reach a diplomatic solution. Of course, President Trump has said there is now this 2-week window in which he hopes there can be a diplomatic solution. Let's speak now to Lord Ricketts, Peter Ricketts, former National Security Advisor. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you for being with us. Your reaction, first of all, to these comments from Donald Trump of this 2-week period of time where hopefully some kind of deal can be worked towards?
Well, I think it's good news. Honestly, I don't think Trump had ever decided what he was going to do. There are two Trumps jostling here in his head. One is the guy who does deals, who gets out of wars and doesn't entangle America in foreign engagements. And the other one is the strongman, who doesn't want to be outdone by anyone in the tough guy stakes. And I think felt that Netanyahu had taken a strong position and he was very tempted by this seductive point about finishing the job. For the moment, I think his base, those in the MAGA movement who want to keep America out of wars, have got the uppermost. He's decided that way, and that is good news. And it's a window of opportunity, including to get the Europeans back into the negotiating business. They were completely sidelined when the Americans were concentrating on those direct talks with Iran through Saudi Arabia. Now the Europeans who know a thing about negotiating with Iran can, I hope, get back into the action.
Do you have concerns over how quickly this could potentially escalate?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, honestly, if Trump had listened to Netanyahu, had got dragged into the war, had bombed this Fordo site in the last couple of nights, the results would have been very unpredictable. I mean, he may or may not have destroyed the site, but the idea this would have been one forensic in and out strike and then that would be the end of it. I mean, that is not up to America or Israel. That's then up to Iran, whether the Iranians decided to escalate by lashing out at American bases, American embassies, oil installations in the Gulf. I think all of that was possible if the Iranians felt they really had absolutely nothing left to lose.
Do you think the UK should and indeed would become involved if the US decided to make that move?
Well, should they, in my view, no. I do not think that we're going to bomb nuclear knowledge out of the Iranians. And I think the only way to get a proper handle on controlling Iran's nuclear ambitions is by doing a deal with them. So I would not be in favour of the UK participating. Could the British help, for example, with basing of American bombers in Diego Garcia? The problem there is, of course, it's an RAF base, and therefore Britain is involved. Britain has to take a view on the legality of military operations carried out from there. And I'm not sure that the British Attorney General would decide that Israel's war on Iran was justified in international law. I don't think he would see there was enough of an imminent threat. So I think there's a real issue about whether Keir Starmer would have had the legal advice that would have allowed him to say yes to American requests to use the base.
Mm. And do you think the Americans would have to ask first? They couldn't just say, well, we pay for the day-to-day running of the base, we're just going to use it.
No, the base agreement is clear that because it remains a British base, British agreement has to be given before offensive military action is taken from it.
And is your understanding as well, because we were talking about the text in the agreement a little bit earlier on, I'll just read it for listeners who weren't with us earlier on. The text of the treaty says that Britain agrees to expeditiously inform Mauritius of any armed attack on a third state directly emanating from the base on Diego Garcia. We were also talking about the added dimension here that Mauritius is on pretty friendly terms with Iran. Could Mauritius say no?
No, and Mauritius, as far as I am not a lawyer, as I understand it, couldn't say no. There is an obligation to expeditiously inform them. Expeditiously can mean an awful lot of things.
Yes.
Can clearly mean after the strike happens. And also that deal is not yet in force. I mean, it's still going through Parliament.
Let me tell you this. Iran's foreign minister has told Iranian state television that Tehran has rejected a US request to open negotiations. He says he wants talks in Geneva, which he's having today with European ministers, to be about the nuclear programme alone. Now, I know it's difficult. He's speaking to Iranian state TV, so there's a certain audience there that he's trying to speak to. But do you feel that we're dealing with, in Iran, a party that is cooperative?
Well, I think it's not surprising he should say that while Iran is under nightly bombardment by Israel. Iran also has to look to its domestic political base. They can't afford to look weak in the face of this Israeli onslaught. So I think while the missiles and the bombs are raining down on them, they are not going to want to talk directly to the Americans. That's why these negotiations in Geneva are important with the Europeans. There's a long track record of Europeans negotiating with Iran, and that's good to get that underway. But honestly, I don't think serious negotiations, I don't think we can expect them to get underway until the aerial war in Iran eases off.
Is there a danger here that as Iran gets backed more and more into a corner, we know that the limits now on its proxies in the region, that actually it may be more likely to develop a kind of crude nuclear weapon, if you like, because they feel that they have no choice?
I think that is a real risk, yes. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think just dealing with the Iranian nuclear threat by, bombing every few years is the right way to do it. Because yes, the more they're driven into a corner, the more they'll feel desperate and they have nothing to lose. And this is very, very dangerous territory. Also, I think even if these installations are destroyed, they will be even more determined in the future to rebuild them in even more secure places, perhaps defended by the latest Russian and Chinese air defenses, because they will judge the only way to keep ourselves safe from these relentless attacks by Israel is by getting eventually to a nuclear weapon. So I think it actually reinforces the risk the more this goes on.
Lord Ricketts, Peter Ricketts, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
He is former National Security Advisor.
Well, I don't want to get involved either, but I've been saying for 20 years, maybe longer, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I've been saying it for a long time. And I think they were a few weeks away from having one. And they had to sign a document. I think they wish they signed it now. It was a fair deal. And now it's a harder thing to sign, It's a lot of water over the dam. But, it's I say it very simply, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. My supporters are America first, they make America great again. My supporters don't want to see Iran have a nuclear weapon. Tucker's a nice guy. He called and apologized the other day because he thought he said things that were a little bit too strong, and I appreciated that. And Ted Cruz is a nice guy. I mean, he's been with me for a long time. I'd say once the race was over, he's been with me ever since, right? But very simple. If they think that it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, then they should oppose me. But nobody thinks it's okay. And it's interesting because I did ask Tucker. I said, well, are you okay with nuclear weapons being in the hands of Iran? And he sort of didn't like that. He didn't want to really, but he sort of didn't like that. And I said, well, if it's okay with you, then you and I do have a difference. But it's really not okay with him. Therefore, you may have to fight, and maybe it'll end, very quickly. But there's no way that you can allow, whether you have to fight or not, you can allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, because the entire world will blow up. I'm not going to let that happen.